The crossing. The departure.
8 days since Torquet was relieved. 3 days until the sensor gap. I packed in the dark while the base slept around me. The noise cataloged everything I touched. Ration packs, 4 days worth. The signal had shown me that the nexus point was 37 kilometers beyond the pale, and the terrain between here and the boundary was 18 kilometers of open ground. Water purifier, medical kit. The Vreth sidearm Torquet had placed on my pillow 7 weeks ago. The carbine Vosran had given me at Keth boundary. 2 weapons too large for human hands. I wrapped both grips in maintenance tape, the way Vosran had told me to. Halik's bunk was already stripped. His pack sat beneath it, neat, organized, the tools arranged with the mechanic's precision that had kept him alive when nothing else could. The stone from his colony world sat on top. He'd tucked it into the pack's outer pocket where he could reach it without opening anything. A small piece of home for a journey that would take him further from home than any human had ever gone. "You don't have to come," I said, for the 4th time. "You keep saying that." His voice was calm in the dark. The old nervousness was gone, burned away or buried, replaced by something quieter. And I keep not listening. Beyond the pale means beyond everything. No tithe law, no military protection, no supply lines, no extraction if it goes wrong. Marcus. He sat up. In the dark, I could feel his heat signature, steady, elevated slightly with the adrenaline of anticipation, not fear. I spent 11 months being afraid of everything in the pale reach. The food, the Vreth, the separatists, the missions, the odds. I was afraid of dying every single day. Then you showed me what the boundary actually is and what's on the other side and what happens if nobody does anything about it. He paused. "I'm not afraid of that. I'm afraid of staying here while you go alone." I didn't argue again. I went to the Vreth barracks that evening, not to say goodbye. Vreth don't do goodbyes. They do presents. Being there is the statement. Leaving is the action. The space between says everything. Kor was cleaning his weapon at the long bench. He looked up when I entered, then went back to work. Vreth acknowledgement. I sat down across from him and disassembled the carbine Vosran had given me. Cleaned it methodically, the way Kor had taught me during week 3. Side by side, a Vreth and a human cleaning weapons in companionable silence. After 20 minutes, Kor set down his weapon. He reached across the bench and adjusted the alignment of my firing mechanism, a fraction of a millimeter, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. Then he closed both eyes for one breath. "I trust you enough to go blind." I nodded. He picked up his weapon and resumed cleaning. Denveth was asleep 2 bunks over. I didn't wake him. I stood in the aisle for a moment, feeling his heat signature, the slow pulse of a Vreth at deep rest, his scales cool against the metal frame of his bunk. He shifted once, a micro movement, and I knew from the thermal pattern that he was dreaming. Denveth always dreamed in temperature changes. Thess was on watch. I wouldn't see her before we left. That was fine. She was a soldier. She would understand when she found out. I walked back to the human barracks and lay on my bunk for the last time. The signal pulsed 327, and beneath it, the nexus point weighted like a compass bearing burned into my nervous system. 37 kilometers beyond the pale, through whatever existed on the other side. The ceiling was metal and cold and familiar. I looked at it and memorized nothing, because the noise had already memorized everything. The components lay spread across Torquet's desk like pieces of a puzzle that no one had authorized him to solve. A diagnostic scanner's power cell. 2 sensor relay capacitors, pulled from the kit Halik had delivered during a routine maintenance inspection that the Council enforcers had allowed because they did not consider a human mechanic worth scrutinizing. a timing circuit salvaged from a ration warmer. Together, they made a device that would overload the southern sensor relay for exactly 12 minutes. The pulse would register as a breach, not a malfunction, but a genuine intrusion alarm. Every soldier and council enforcer on the base would turn south. Standard response protocols required full perimeter coverage, which meant drawing resources from every other quadrant. The northern wire would be unmonitored for 12 minutes. He had told Marcus through the door yesterday, during another maintenance check. The timing was precise, day 11, 0200 hours, when the overnight patrol was at its furthest southern point, and the sensor coverage gap Marcus had identified aligned with the base's lowest alertness window. Torquet assembled the device with three-fingered hands that did not tremble. 22 years of service, 340 names on his memorial list, and now he was building a distraction to help a human conscript walk into the dark beyond the edge of known space. He had received word from Drenkai 3 hours ago. The message had arrived as a requisition for thermal insulation panels, the cipher embedded in the part numbers and quantities. 6 units now. Not 4, 6. Drenkai had reached 2 more frontier commanders in adjacent sectors, all combat experienced, all in positions the Crucible Protocol had not yet touched, all quietly preparing for compromised orders that might arrive at any moment. And Voss ran, based on the timeline of his departure, today was day 14. He should be reaching the 22nd combined operations. If he had survived the 600 kilometers, if the separatists had not found him, if the Crucible Protocol's surveillance had not detected an anomalous patrol moving northwest through hostile territory, Torquet did not allow himself to consider the alternative. Vossran had 14 years of shared service behind him and 240 lives ahead of him. He would arrive, he would warn Voss then, and the 22nd would prepare. The commander set the timer, looked at the device on his desk, ugly, improvised, the work of a soldier who had run out of legitimate options. Then he placed it behind the ventilation grate in his quarters, where the enforcer's scans would not reach. 2 more days. Then the southern alarm. Then 12 minutes. Then Marcus and Halleck would walk north, through the wire, into the wilderness, toward the boundary of everything the Tithe controlled. And Torquet would sit in his confined quarters and listen for the alarm, and know that the most important thing he had done in 22 years of service was helping a human walk away.
The wire.
The alarm hit at 0200 exactly. Torquet's timing was perfect, it always was. The southern perimeter lit up, claxons, floodlights. The electromagnetic signature of the entire base shifted south as every system pivoted to the breach point. I felt it through the noise, 200 thermal signatures moving, weapons powering up, Krendar's council enforcers breaking from their station at a dead run. Now, I said. Halleck and I moved north. No running. Running generates heat signatures that the secondary sensors might catch even during a southern-focused alert. We walked fast, steady, through the gap between sensor relay 14 and 15 that I had mapped over 6 nights of listening. The gap was 9 meters wide and existed for 43 seconds during each relay's scanning cycle. We crossed it in 31. The wire was ahead, not electrified. The 9th Forward's resources didn't extend to powered perimeter fencing on the northern side, where the terrain itself was considered sufficient barrier. Standard razor wire 3 meters high. Halleck had a cutter from the maintenance toolkit. He opened a gap in 11 seconds. Farmer's hands, good with tools. We went through. Halleck resealed the wire behind us with repair clips, From the outside, the cut would be invisible until someone inspected the section closely. By then, we'd be beyond detection range. Behind us, the southern alarm wailed. 12 minutes of chaos. We had used 3. We walked north. The terrain was broken rock and sparse vegetation, the kind of landscape that separated frontier bases from each other across the northern sectors. No paths, no infrastructure. The stars overhead were dense and cold, and the temperature was dropping. Human lungs worked harder in thin, cold air, and by kilometer 2, my breath was coming in visible clouds. The base fell behind us. First the lights, then the sound, then the electromagnetic presence. The noise in my head simplified as we moved beyond the base's influence, the complex symphony of 100 systems and 200 soldiers narrowing to the simpler frequencies of open ground. Rock, wind, the faint emissions of Halleck's diagnostic scanner, powered down but still warm, and the signal, growing louder with every step north. Not louder, clearer, as if the base's electromagnetic noise had been static obscuring a station that was always broadcasting at full power, and now the static was fading and the broadcast was coming through pure. "How far?" Halleck asked. His voice was quiet, not afraid, respectful. The silence of the wilderness demanded it. 18 kilometers to the boundary, then 37 beyond. 55 kilometers total. Yes. In hostile territory, with no support, carrying 4 days of rations. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I've walked further on the farm." I almost smiled, almost. We reached the pale at dawn. I knew it was coming 3 kilometers out. The signal shifted, not in pattern but in quality, as if the broadcast were passing through a physical medium that altered its texture. The noise in my head grew denser, richer, layered with frequencies I had no names for. And ahead, in the gray light of the approaching sunrise, I saw the boundary. Not with my eyes. My eyes showed me nothing: rock, sky, the mountains continuing northward, terrain indistinguishable from what we'd been crossing for 5 hours. But the part of my brain that processed the signal, the part that had been building itself since the first night in the barracks, that part saw everything. The boundary was a wall, not vertical, not solid, but a wall nonetheless, a membrane of energy that stretched from the ground to the upper atmosphere and continued beyond, curving away in both directions along the frontier, following the line of the Pale Reach's border. It existed in frequencies below anything the Tithe's equipment could detect, below anything any species in the Pale Reach could perceive, except me. "Marcus." Halleck was watching my face. "What do you see?" "The wall," I said. "It's real, Halleck. It's physical. Not in the way we understand physical. It exists in frequencies, not matter. But it's there. I can feel it." "What does it look like?" I struggled for words. How do you describe a thing that exists in senses you didn't have a year ago? "Layers," I said. "Like, imagine water flowing over glass. Except the water is energy and the glass is the boundary between our space and whatever is beyond. Some places the flow is thick, dense, opaque. Those are the points where the frontier units reinforce it, the electromagnetic presence of a functional military base pouring energy into the membrane. Other places it's thin, almost transparent. The destroyed units. Yes, 11 holes in the wall, and it's thinner everywhere else. The whole thing is degrading. The Crucible Protocol hasn't just punched holes. It's weakened the entire structure. We found the crossing point 200 meters east. A thin spot, not one of the destroyed unit gaps, but a natural weakness where 2 currents of the membrane diverged. The signal had guided me to it. The intelligence on the other side had shown me this spot specifically, the way you would show a friend the unlocked door in a high wall. "I can feel it," I told Halleck. "The membrane is thin here, maybe 3 meters thick. We can walk through." "What happens when we walk through?" "I don't know. No one's done this. Not in living memory. Maybe not ever. The founding species built the wall from the inside, and the signal intelligence has been trapped on the outside since it went up. Halleck looked at the empty air ahead of us. To his eyes, there was nothing there. Rock and sky and the mountains continuing north. "Will it hurt?" he asked. I listened to the frequencies. The membrane was energy, raw, undifferentiated, operating in bands that human biology wasn't designed to interact with. Passing through it would mean exposing every cell in our bodies to a field that existed outside normal physics. "Yes," I said. He nodded, pulled the stone from his pocket, looked at it once and put it back. Together, then. We walked forward. The membrane hit like a wall of static. Every nerve in my body fired at once, not pain exactly, but sensation beyond anything I had a framework for. The noise in my head went white. The signal vanished, replaced by the membrane itself, screaming through every frequency I could perceive and 100 I couldn't. I felt Halleck grab my arm. His grip was iron, the farmer's strength that had kept him alive through 11 months of hell, and we pushed forward through the thickness of it, 3 meters of energy that felt like walking through lightning rendered as honey. 3 steps, 4, 5, then silence. We were through.
Beyond the pale.
The rocks were the same. The sky was the same. The mountains continued northward, identical in every physical dimension to the terrain we'd been crossing. If I closed the signal reading down, if I could close it down, which I couldn't anymore, I would have seen nothing different. But the noise told me everything. The boundary was behind us. I could feel it, a wall of frequencies at my back, blazing in my perception like a bonfire. From this side, I could see its structure more clearly than I ever had from within. The layers, the currents, the thin spots and thick spots. The damage. 11 gaps where the destroyed units had stopped reinforcing the membrane, visible as dark patches in the energy flow. And between the gaps, the overall degradation. The wall thinning centimeter by centimeter, as the Crucible Protocol's replacement units failed to generate the electromagnetic density their predecessors had maintained. "It's thinner than I thought," I said. "The boundary. From the inside I could feel the weak points. From out here I can see the whole thing. It's not failing at the holes, it's failing everywhere. The holes are just where it fails first." Halleck stood beside me, his diagnostic scanner in his hand from pure habit. The scanner showed nothing. Normal readings, normal atmosphere, normal terrain. But his eyes were on my face, reading whatever he could from the expression of a man seeing something he couldn't see. "How long does it have?" he asked. I listened, calculated. The membrane's energy density was a measurable thing now. I could feel the rate of degradation, the slow bleed of power from the wall's structure. Without the destroyed units, the remaining frontier bases were carrying a load they weren't built for. The wall was still intact, still functional, still holding. But the margin was narrowing. "Months," I said. "Not years. If the Crucible Protocol takes the 7th scouting and the 22nd, it's weeks." And then I felt it. Not the signal was everywhere now, woven into the ambient electromagnetic environment like humidity in air. What I felt was the source, the intelligence itself. Close. Not the faint whisper from beyond the pale that I'd been chasing for weeks, but a presence vast, warm, patient, occupying the space around us like a weather system made of consciousness. "Halleck, I know, I can feel something, like heat, but not heat." He could feel it. Not the way I could, not as structured frequencies and patterns and emotional textures, but as a physical sensation. The intelligence's presence was dense enough to register on human skin, a warmth that existed in frequencies Halleck's body could detect even if his brain couldn't process them. "Don't be afraid," I said. I'm not. He paused. I think it's introducing itself. He was right. The warmth shifted, modulated, became a pattern. Not the 327 of the broadcast signal, but something more complex. A texture that my nervous system translated as greeting. Welcome. Relief. The emotional equivalent of a long-held breath finally released. It had been waiting for centuries, and we had come. We walked north. The nexus point was 37 kilometers beyond the boundary, and the terrain was navigable but rough. But walking was secondary now because the intelligence was teaching me, not in words, in patterns. In frequencies that carried meaning the way music carries emotion, not through vocabulary but through structure. The intelligence showed me its history the way you'd show someone a scar, not to explain the wound but to explain who you became because of it. It was old. I had felt that during our first contact, geological old, patient beyond human comprehension. But now, closer, I understood the texture of that age. It had not been alone always. Its species had been many hundreds, maybe thousands of energy beings existing in the spaces between stars, drifting through the pale reaches territory in patterns that followed gravitational currents and electromagnetic flows. They had been here first, before the founding species, before the tithe, before the concept of territory existed in this region of space. When the founding species arrived and built the boundary, the energy beings had not objected. They had no concept of walls. They existed everywhere. A wall was an irrelevance, until the wall sealed, and the energy beings found themselves divided, some inside the pale reach, where their presence was undetectable and harmless, and some outside, trapped with the thing the wall had been built to contain. The ones inside had faded over millennia, without the open spaces between stars, without the gravitational currents that sustained them. They had thinned and dispersed. Gone. Not dead, energy doesn't die, but diffused beyond coherence, like smoke in a room. The one that remained beyond the wall had survived by choosing a purpose. It positioned itself at the boundary's edge. It watched. It broadcast. It maintained its coherence through sheer function, the act of keeping vigil giving it a structure that pure existence could not. The Vigil-Keeper, the last of its kind, alone for centuries with a warning no one could hear, until me. Show me, I said, aloud, because shaping intent into the signal's frequencies was easier when I anchored it in physical speech. Show me what's behind you. The Vigil-Keeper hesitated. I felt it, a contraction in the ambient field, the emotional equivalent of a flinch. It didn't want to show me, not because the knowledge was forbidden, but because the knowledge was heavy, and it had been carrying it alone for so long that sharing it felt like handing someone a weight that might break them. I pushed gently, not demanding, asking, the way Halleck asked me about the signal, with patience and the willingness to hear the answer. The Vigil-Keeper showed me. Deeper in the space beyond the pale, further from the boundary, past the energy being's vigil post, something occupied the dark between stars. Not a creature, not a species, a presence. An awareness so vast that it existed on a scale that made the Tithe's 200-star systems look like a puddle beside an ocean. It had been sleeping when the boundary was erected. The founding species had known it was there, had built the wall specifically to contain it, to ensure that its slow, cyclical awakening would be buffered by an energy barrier that could absorb the electromagnetic surge of a consciousness, the size of a stellar region returning to awareness. For millennia, the wall had held. The sleeper's cycles of waking and sleeping had pushed against the boundary and been absorbed. Each cycle, the wall flexed. Each cycle, the frontier units reinforced it. The Tithe maintained the wall. The wall contained the sleeper. The system worked. But the thinning had changed the equation. 10 years of Crucible Protocol destruction had weakened the barrier at exactly the points where the sleeper's awakening cycles pushed hardest. The next cycle, the Vigil-Keeper could feel it building. A rising tide of awareness in the deep space beyond would push against a wall that could no longer absorb the pressure. When? I asked. The answer came as a sensation of time, not precise, because the Vigil-Keeper didn't count time the way humans did, but proportional. Soon, within the framework of the barrier's remaining integrity. Months, not years. The same timeline I'd estimated from the boundary's degradation rate. And if the wall fails, the Vigil-Keeper showed me what the sleeper's full awakening would look like. Not an invasion, not a war, something worse. The electromagnetic surge of a stellar-scale consciousness returning to awareness would ripple through every system in the pale reach, overloading sensor networks, frying communication arrays, disrupting the technological infrastructure that 200-star systems depended on. Not destruction. Disruption. The kind of disruption that would collapse civilization not through violence but through the simple inability to function. And after the disruption, the presence. Awake, aware, occupying the same space as the pale reach. Not hostile, not aggressive, just there. A consciousness so vast that every species in the reach would exist within it like bacteria in a body, unable to ignore it, unable to escape it, unable to be anything other than small.
The nexus.
The nexus point was unremarkable. A flat stretch of ground between two rocky outcrops, 37 kilometers from the boundary. The rocks were gray, the soil was thin, the sky was the same cold blue it had been all day. Halleck looked around and saw nothing special. His scanner confirmed it, normal readings across every band it could detect. But beneath my feet, the frequencies converged. 3 rivers of energy, the boundary's major structural currents, the deep flows that held the membrane together met at this point and merged. I could feel them the way you feel a river's current when you stand in it. Pressure, direction, power flowing past and through me. The boundary was distant 37 kilometers south, but its energy ran through the ground like roots of a tree, and this was where the roots were thickest. Here, I said. This is it. The Vigil-Keeper responded. Its ambient presence contracted, focused, became a shape around us. Not visible, not physical, but perceivable. A cocoon of energy, gentle and deliberate, positioning itself between us and the deeper frequencies that leaked from the sleeping thing beyond. Protection. The Vigil-Keeper was shielding us. Thank you, I said. The intelligence pulsed, warm, complex, the emotional texture of acknowledgement that transcended any spoken language. Halleck set down his pack. What do I do? Stay close. Keep talking to me. When this starts, I might lose track of where I am. The noise is going to get very loud. I need an anchor. He sat down, pulled out the stone, and held it. I'm not going anywhere. I knelt on the ground, placed both hands flat on the thin soil, closed my eyes, and opened everything. The noise exploded. Every frequency, every pattern, every electromagnetic signal within my range flooded in simultaneously. Not the filtered, managed flow I'd learned to control over 7 weeks, but the raw, unprocessed torrent. The boundary's energy currents surged through my hands, up my arms, into the neural architecture that the signal had been building since the first night in the barracks. I screamed. Couldn't help it. The input was beyond anything my nervous system was designed to handle, a fire hose of energy pouring through a garden hose. My vision whited out, my muscles locked, every nerve ending in my body fired at maximum intensity, and the noise became a roar that blotted out thought. Marcus, Halleck's voice, close, his hand on my shoulder, warm and real and human. I'm here, I'm right here. I grabbed onto his voice the way a drowning man grabs a rope, held it, used it as a reference point, a fixed star in a sky of overwhelming noise. The torrent continued, but Halic's voice gave me a frame, a boundary within the boundary, and then I did what the Vigil-Keeper had shown me. I stopped receiving and started transmitting. The energy flowed through me and I pushed it outward, not with muscle, not with technology, with the neural architecture that 7 weeks of signal reading had built. The same structures that let me feel heartbeats and detect lies and map minefields and read the boundaries topology. Those structures, powered by the nexus point's convergent energy, became a transmitter, an amplifier, a living relay station positioned at the point of maximum leverage. I could feel the boundary responding. 37 kilometers south, the membrane shifted. The thin spots, the 11 gaps where the destroyed units had left the wall vulnerable, began to thicken. Not by much, not to their original density, but the energy I was pushing through the nexus found its way along the structural currents and filled the worst of the gaps the way water fills cracks in stone. It was not enough to replace what the Crucible Protocol had destroyed. One human nervous system could not generate the electromagnetic density of 11 military bases, but it could stabilize. It could reinforce the structure at its weakest points. It could buy time. The cost was measured in my body. My hands burned where they touched the ground. My vision was gone entirely, not darkness, but white noise, the visual cortex overwhelmed by input it wasn't designed to process. Blood ran from my nose, warm on my upper lip. My heartbeat was erratic, the cardiac rhythm disrupted by the energy flowing through my chest. "Marcus, your nose is bleeding." Halic's voice. "Steady the anchor. Your pulse is wrong. Tell me you're okay." "I'm not okay," I managed, "but it's working." "How long?" "I don't know, until it's done, until the wall holds." The sun set while I held the nexus. I don't know how long it took. Time stopped meaning anything when every nerve was a conduit for energy that predated the species that built the wall. The Vigil-Keeper maintained its protective envelope, shielding me from the deeper frequencies, filtering the worst of the noise. Halic kept talking about his farm, about the stone in his pocket, about the colony world where the wheat grew tall enough to hide in and the sky was pink at sunset. I held onto his voice and pushed energy into a wall that was older than humanity. When it was done, I knew. Not because the energy stopped, it didn't stop. The nexus point was still alive beneath my hands, but because the boundary structure shifted from degrading to stable. The thin spots had thickened. The gaps had narrowed. The membrane was not healed, but it was holding. The sleeper's next cycle would push against a wall that could absorb the pressure. Time. Not a solution, not a victory, but time. Months, maybe more. Enough for Torquet's network to grow. Enough for the resistance to find a way to stop the Crucible Protocol. Enough for the Tithe to learn what its frontier was actually protecting. I pulled my hands from the ground. The energy stopped flowing through me and the absence was almost worse than the presence, like silence after a symphony, deafening in its emptiness. I fell sideways. Halic caught me, of course he did. "Is it done?" he asked. "It's done. The wall is holding." I opened my eyes. The stars were out. The sky was clear. My hands were burned not by heat but by the energy that had passed through them, leaving the skin reddened and raw. "It's not permanent. I'll need to do this again, regularly." But it bought time. How much time? Enough. He helped me sit up. The stone from his pocket pressed against my arm where he steadied me. The Vigil-Keeper's presence pulsed, warm, grateful, relieved. For the first time in centuries, the wall was not weakening.
The empty bunk.
Krendar entered the confinement quarters without announcement. The door opened, and 8 feet of council assessor filled the frame, gold eyes bright with a fury that his composed expression could not entirely suppress. Torquet did not stand. He had been confined for 14 days. Standing for assessors had stopped being a reflex on day 3. "Where is he?" Krendar asked. No preamble, no administrative formality. The mask was off, beyond the pale. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either violence or recalculation. Krendar chose recalculation. "Explain." Torquet explained. All of it. The signal Marcus had detected. The boundary's true nature, not a political border but a physical containment system, reinforced by the electromagnetic presence of frontier military installations. The Crucible Protocol's systematic dismantlement of that containment. The 11 destroyed units, the 3 more targeted. The thing sleeping beyond the wall that was being weakened to the point of failure. He told Krendar about the intelligence beyond the pale, the energy being that had been broadcasting warnings for centuries. About Marcus's signal reading evolving into signal sending. About the nexus point where a human amplifier could reinforce the barrier from outside. Krendar listened without interruption. When Torquet finished, the assessor stood in silence for 10 seconds. "You expect me to believe," Krendar said, "that a human conscript with an unverified perceptual anomaly has walked beyond the boundary of Tithe jurisdiction to reinforce an energy barrier that no instrument in the Pale Reach can detect, against a threat that no intelligence service has ever identified. I expect you to verify it." "How?" "The boundary's energy readings. Run a deep spectrum analysis on the electromagnetic output of the northern frontier, below standard detection bands, in the frequencies that the Tithe's equipment doesn't normally monitor. You have council-level access to the Tithe sensor network. Use it." Krendar did not move. His gold eyes were fixed on Torquet with an intensity that bordered on violence. But underneath the institutional authority and the true believer's conviction, Torquet saw something he had not seen before. Doubt. Not doubt in the Crucible Protocol. That conviction ran too deep to be shaken by one confined commander's testimony. But doubt in the completeness of his understanding. The unsettling recognition that there might be a variable in the equation that the Council of Calculation had not accounted for. "The Crucible Protocol's operational parameters are beyond your clearance," Krendar said. "The restructuring of frontier operations serves objectives that you are not authorized to evaluate. I am authorized to protect the soldiers under my command. The Crucible Protocol is killing them. Your command has been dissolved. My responsibility has not." Krendar turned and left. The door sealed behind him. Torquet sat in the silence and waited. He had given Krendar the truth, the most dangerous weapon in a system built on controlled information. Truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. And Krendar, for all his conviction, was intelligent. Intelligent enough to check. Intelligent enough to run the deep spectrum analysis and see the readings that would confirm everything Torquet had said. The question was not whether Krendar would verify. The question was what he would do with the verification.
What the ash holds.
The notification arrived through the maintenance grid. A standard resupply request from the gate checkpoint, requesting medical supplies for a returning patrol. The request was signed by Drill Sergeant Vossran. Torquet read the notification 3 times, not because he needed to comprehend the words, because each reading made the relief harder to contain. Vossran had returned. Through the confinement door, Torquet heard the base respond, the shift in activity that meant someone important had arrived. Not the clinical precision of an assessor's visit, but the organic, disorderly energy of soldiers recognizing one of their own. Voices in the corridor. The heavy tread of Vreth boots moving with purpose. 2 hours later, Vosran appeared at the confinement door. The council enforcers let him pass. They had learned over 21 days that preventing Vreth soldiers from seeing their confined commander generated more friction than it resolved. Through the door, Vosran's voice, rough, exhausted, the voice of a soldier who had walked 1,200 kilometers in 21 days. Commander, Sergeant, the 22nd is warned. Vosren is preparing. He's relocating to a secondary defensive position and has already refused one set of deployment orders that he identified as compromised. He sends his respects. Your team. A pause. When Vosran spoke again, his voice carried the weight that Torquet knew from his own memorial list. 3. Thenkor Vrendar and the human specialist Chen. Separatist ambush on the return crossing, day 17. They held the ridge while I went through. 3 soldiers. Added to the count, Torquet closed his eyes for one breath. Opened them. Their names will be remembered. Yes, Commander, Drenkai. 8 units. She has been busy. 8. The network was growing faster than Torquet had dared to hope. 8 frontier units warned and preparing. 8 experienced commanders who understood what the Crucible Protocol was doing and had chosen to resist. It was not an army, but it was the beginning of one. And Krendar, the assessor, had gone quiet. Torquet had expected retribution. The dissolution order, the formal charges of insubordination, the escort to a military tribunal that would end his career and likely his freedom. He had expected it for 21 days, and it had not come. Instead, Krendar had sequestered himself in the communications room. He had requisitioned full access to the Tithe's deep-spectrum sensor network, the instruments that monitored frequencies below standard detection bands. He had been running analyses for 72 hours. Through the wall, Torquet could not hear what Krendar was finding, but he could imagine. The boundary's energy topology, visible for the first time to someone with council-level sensor access. The thin spots corresponding to destroyed units. The overall degradation of a containment system that the Tithe had been maintaining for millennia without understanding what it maintained, and perhaps, a stabilization pattern at the thin spots, new energy reinforcing the membrane at its weakest points, energy that had not been there 21 days ago, energy that corresponded in timing and location to a human signal reader positioned at a nexus point beyond the pale. Krendar was a true believer, but he was also intelligent. And intelligent true believers, when confronted with evidence that their beliefs are incomplete, do not break, they recalculate. Dawn at the nexus point. I placed my hands on the ground and felt the convergence, 3 rivers of energy meeting beneath my palms, flowing through the neural architecture that had been built for this. The amplification was easier now. Not painless, it would never be painless, but manageable. My body was adapting. The neural pathways strengthening. The noise transforming from a torrent into a current, still powerful but navigable. I pushed the energy outward, along the structural currents, into the boundary. 37 kilometers south, the membrane thickened at the thin spots. The gaps narrowed, the wall held. 8 minutes. That was how long each session took now. The first time had been hours. The second, 90 minutes. The third, 40. My nervous system was learning to do this the way muscles learn to carry weight, through repetition, adaptation, growth. Halek sat 3 meters away, eating a ration pack and watching the horizon. He had built our camp with his farmer's practicality, a wind shelter from stacked rocks, a rain catch from emergency sheeting, a fire pit that used the local scrub brush for fuel. The Vigil-Keeper's protective envelope kept the worst of the cold at bay, but Halleck didn't trust energy-based heating systems he couldn't see. He wanted a fire, so he built one. "Breakfast?" he asked when I pulled my hands from the ground. "In a minute." I sat back, flexed my fingers. The burns from the first session had healed. The Vigil-Keeper had done something to accelerate the tissue repair, flooding my hands with frequencies that promoted cellular regeneration. My skin was pink and new, sensitive as a child's. The boundary was holding. I could feel it, a steady pulse in my awareness, like a heartbeat. The wall's heartbeat, measured in electromagnetic frequencies that no instrument in the pale reach could detect. But I could detect them. I could feel every thin spot, every thick spot, every current and eddy in the membrane structure. And I could feel the stabilization, the reinforcement I was providing, small but significant, shoring up the weakest points. At night, I sat outside our shelter and listened to the frequencies beyond the wall. The sleeping thing was still there, vast, stirring, the slow, cyclical awakening that the boundary had been built to contain. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing, a pressure shift, a deepening of the electromagnetic background, the sense of something immense moving in its sleep. But the wall held. My amplifications, twice daily, were keeping the worst thin spots reinforced. The destroyed unit's gaps were not healed. I couldn't replace 11 military bases, but they were stabilized. The membrane flexed where it had been fracturing. The currents flowed where they had been stagnating. Time. That was what I was buying. Time for Torquet's network to grow. Time for the resistance to reach the commanders who could stop the Crucible Protocol. Time for someone, maybe Krendar, running his analyses in the communications room, seeing things the Council of Calculation had never shown him, to understand that the frontier was not expendable, that the debt was not punishment, that the wall was the reason for everything. The Vigil-Keeper pulsed around me, warm, patient, no longer alone. I thought about the word the Vreth had for humans, Tithe. The residue left after the debt has burned through everything else. They meant it as dismissal, the thing that remained when everything of value had been consumed. Worthless, spent, used up, but ash isn't nothing. Ash is what holds after the fire. Ash is the residue that stays when the flame is gone. Ash enriches the soil. Ash preserves the shape of what burned. I was beyond the pale, beyond the Tithe's law, the military's protection, every safety net that civilization provided. I was sitting in the dark at the edge of known space, carrying a debt that the Tithe had designed to break humanity, and using it to hold the line against something that could break everything. The debt was real. The wall was real. The thing behind the wall was real, and the ash held. I placed my hands on the ground, felt the convergence, pushed the energy outward. The wall thickened. The boundary stabilized. The membrane between everything known and everything ancient and waking absorbed the pressure and held. Halleck's stone clicked softly in the dark behind me. The Vigil-Keeper pulsed. The stars burned cold and dense overhead, indifferent to the membrane that separated their light from the thing that slept beyond. Dawn was hours away. I would amplify again at sunrise, and again at sunset, and again, for as long as my nervous system could carry the load and the nexus point could channel the energy, and the wall needed a human at the fulcrum to keep the balance. The debt is real, but we get to choose what we pay. I chose this.
Thanks for listening. We post new stories daily. Hit subscribe to stay in the loop.